What's up YouTube? KS Gun Guy here. Thanks for joining me today as always. If you like what you see here, do be sure to like, subscribe, and share. There's plenty more content on the way. So I have for you today another in the series of If I Could Only Have One. And this series is designed to take a couple of firearms, whether very similar or in some cases a little bit different, and comparing and contrasting them, taking a look at things like specs from a general standpoint, not a deep dive, features, a little bit of value. Of course, I'll be wheeling and shooting along the way. We'll take a look at the triggers of both firearms, and at the end of the video, I will announce a winner. Now here's the thing. It's a winner just from an opinion standpoint. Both of these guns are great guns. So if you have either one or both, you're doing great. This is merely for fun and just I like to take a step back every once in a while and just say, or challenge myself really, say if I could only have one, which one would it be? So for today's video, I chose to do the FN 509, and it is unloaded. I do have an unloaded magazine in here. And the HK VP9, and once again, unloaded. So I chose both of these firearms for a couple of reasons. I haven't shot either one in a while, so I felt like I was kind of fresh out of the box as far as shooting. I haven't spent much time with either one for a fair amount of time. So it was fun revisiting that, and we'll get to that shooting here in just a little while. But I also feel like these guns are a little bit unique in that they're kind of all-arounders. They are definitely somewhere in the compact to full-size range. They fall kind of in the middle, at least in my opinion. But they also serve a lot of different purposes. They certainly are carryable if you want to carry a larger firearm. They could be home defense, they could be range use, you could even compete with these. I mean, they really are, again, all-arounders. So I thought it was kind of a fun comparison between the two. So let's go ahead and take a look at some specs. We're not going to deep dive into this. I'm not going to spit a bunch of numbers at you. But from a length standpoint, both of these firearms are very similar from a length standpoint. Now, they do this just a little bit differently. The FN is perhaps a little bit more contoured, at least in the back, but again, from a size perspective, they are very similar. And then from a heights perspective, we'll get that right there. Height, by the way, if you want to correct me. And then a width standpoint as well, very, very similar. There's not a lot of difference between the two there. And then from a weight standpoint, there's only about an ounce or so difference, with the FN coming in just about an ounce heavier than the HK is. So again, very similar between both of them. Now, as far as features go, once again, there are a lot of similarities between the two. First and foremost, the mag release. Now, there's certainly some similarities there, but also some differences. But from an ambidextrous standpoint, at least, both of these guns are ambidextrous out of the box. However, they do it just a little bit differently, with the FN being the, I guess we could call it the American-style button release on both sides versus the European paddle-style release on the HK VP9. And then from a slide lock, slide release standpoint, once again, they are fully ambidextrous, and it does work on both sides. I know there are some firearms out there that have the ambidextrous button, but they don't necessarily work very well. These definitely do. And then from a takedown standpoint, you'll notice that both of them do have kind of the standard takedown lever. You do have to turn this a quarter turn, and you're able to disassemble the firearms after locking both of them back. So very similar from that perspective. But here's where we start getting just a little bit different in terms of the frame. So we'll take a look at the FN for just a moment or two, and look at the grips on this and that sort of thing. So from a grip texture standpoint, they've really carried forward the FNS line, although I think they've perhaps taken it down just a little bit. It's a little bit less aggressive, at least I feel like, than the FNS line. But you do have back and forward serrations on here that are actually fairly comfortable. I actually like these quite a bit. And then on the side straps, we do have little pyramids here on the bottom, and then we have kind of a stippling texture as we get towards the top. And I've noted before that I really like that. I think it's a nice touch, and I think it actually makes the gun look really nice as well. Now, it does have removable back straps. There are only two that come in the box. There is a flat back strap, and then there is this one that gives just a little bit more material to grab onto. I understand that they either have or are coming out with a third, slightly larger back strap. I'm not sure if it's out just yet, so leave a comment if you know that there is one out there. From a magazine perspective, now one thing about the FN, it does have 17 rounds, and they are steel magazines. It does come with 2 magazines for this particular model. Anyway, so 2 magazines there. Now it does have your accessory rails for lights, lasers, grenade launchers, that sort of thing. So from a grip standpoint or an ergonomic standpoint, it's reasonably ergonomic. However, once we jump into the VP9, things get just a little bit different. Now you'll notice right away that the contours around the grip are definitely very different. It does have some finger grooves and a little bit more accentuated contours on the grip. So at least for my size hand, and I have kind of average large hands, I suppose. It fits very nicely. I've always said that the ergonomics on the VP9 are among my favorites. So there might be a little bit of bias in there, but again, both guns are certainly comfortable. Now, this does have removable back straps, but HK takes it one step further, and they do have removable side straps as well. So you get small, medium, and large for both the back and the sides, for a total of 27 different combinations. So I have to give the leg up a little bit to the HK, at least from a customizable standpoint out of the box. You don't have to spend any more money to do that, which I like. Now, one thing that the HK has met with a little bit of criticism on is the fact that it is only a 15-round magazine on that. I have no problem with that whatsoever. 15 rounds or better in a compact or full-size gun, to me, is just fine. If you get more, that's great. It's a bonus, but to me, 15 rounds is good. Now, this particular model of the VP9, which is the LE model, it did come with 3 magazines. I had to spend a little bit more money to do so, but I like the fact that I got a 3rd magazine with that. Now, it does have your accessory rail for lights, lasers, grenade launchers, so you don't lose or gain anything with that particular feature. Now, from a slide perspective, there are a couple of things that are definitely similar with the slides. You do have your forward and back cocking serrations, which is really nice. The finish on both guns is very good. I think both of these would be very durable firearms, especially if you're carrying or if you have to bang it around a little bit, what have you. The FN 509 did recontour the slide just a little bit from the FNS line, and I do like the contours on the 509 better. I think it's a better looking gun. The FNS series is just fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but I think that, I don't know, the millwork is just a little bit nicer, in my opinion, for sure. Now, one other thing that's a little bit unique with the VP9, and it met with certainly some criticism, at least in the beginning, you'll notice that there are a couple of little, I like to call them ears, or little polymer tabs that stick out from the slide. Now, these are removable, so you can take them out. You do have to take off your rear sight for that, unfortunately, but these are actually designed to aid in manipulating the slide. And at first, I thought it was a little bit gimmicky, but now I actually am very fond of it. They definitely do exactly what they're supposed to do, and they make manipulating this slide very easy. Now, from a sights perspective, I'll try and line these guys up for you here, and I'll do each one independently, of course. But both of these sight lineups are decent. However, I am a little bit more of a fan of one over the other. So when we take a look at the 509, and I'll wheel this in, this does have steel sights on it out of the box, which is good. Now, these are the glowy sights, or they phosphoresce, gather a little bit of light, and they glow for a period of time. That's all fine and good, but again, from a carry standpoint, I don't think they serve that much of a purpose, simply because, especially if you're inside the waistband, they're not going to be charging and gathering light. So it's nice to get it out of the box, but at the end of the day, I would rather have night sights. Now, they do have a ledge for one-handed manipulations. They are steel, which is good. One thing I've noted on these sights, they definitely are a little bit tall, at least for my shooting and my shooting style. So I tend to shoot this gun a little bit low. And I found that to be the case when I shot both of these guns together. So more on that here in just a moment. Now, the sights on the VP9, now again, this is the LE version, so out of the box, this actually came with not only night sights, but also fiber optic sights. These are True Glow, I think they're TFX sights if I'm not mistaken, but they do have fiber optic rods in here, so they're really easy to pick up during the day, but they also have the tritium inserts in them as well, so they glow at night. They don't need to be charged. They are always charged, and there's a little bit of a white outline on the front outline to help, or on the front sight rather, to help you catch that sight, and I like that quite a bit. So from a sights perspective, now again, this is the LE model, so I had to pay a little bit more for this, but I do like these sights quite a bit, and I do consider that stock out of the box. So that's the features and the specs of both of these firearms. Let's go ahead and take a look at a little bit of shooting and see how these guys do. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that footage at the range. So from a shooting perspective, now I've been wheeling in some shooting footage, certainly from some sessions that these guns are not together, not shooting them together, but I did take them both to the range and filmed just a little bit comparing and contrasting the two. And I will say that the HK had a little bit better day than the 509. And I attribute that to a couple of things. The ergonomics certainly on the VP9, and then the sight setup. I think for me, at least, this is a little bit better shooter. And again, your mileage may vary there. The 509's, it's a good shooter. There's certainly nothing wrong with it. I just, for whatever reason, don't connect with it quite as well as I do the VP9. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at these triggers here for just a moment or two. Now, the trigger on the 509 is a safety lever or hinge design, and it doesn't have the dingus kind of like a Glock, but rather more like a Smith & Wesson M&P, something like that. But once we move our trigger, we do have our uptake, and there's a little bit of grit in there. It's not too bad, though. It's not the smoothest trigger, but it's not the worst trigger I've ever pulled either. And once we get to our wall, it's a nice defined wall. And then we do have our brake, and it's a pretty clean snap on the brake. It's really not too bad of a trigger. And then we've got our reset, and very audible, very tactile reset. I like the reset on this actually quite a bit, although it's out, 2 or 3 millimeters, whatever the case may be. And then we get to our starting point. So one more time, we've got our uptake here, a little bit of grit. And we've got our brake. And then we've got our reset, and then we're back to the start there. So it's a good trigger. It's not a great trigger in my opinion, but it's a good trigger. It's certainly doable. I would consider this kind of like a duty trigger, so to speak. Maybe I'll define that one day. Maybe I'll know how to define that one day. But again, it's good. It's not necessarily the best. Now, one thing that's a little bit unusual with the HK trigger, actually a couple of things. One, there's a little bit of a valley that follows underneath the trigger, and they've actually done away with this with the VP9 SK, but it's there for the VP9. And if you've been following my channel, you know that when I shoot, I don't shoot with the pad of my finger. I actually wrap my finger through just a little bit more. My hands must be just large enough to where this is more comfortable. I've been doing this pretty much my entire life, and so I'm used to it and a little bit more comfortable and accurate with it, whether it's the way you should do it or not, whatever, this is how I shoot. And so this valley sometimes with the VP9 can catch my finger a little bit, and after about 250 or 300 rounds in one session, it can beat my finger up just a little bit, but small price to pay for a fun gun to shoot. So from an uptake standpoint here, now I find it's very unusual when you pull the trigger on a VP9 slowly. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a catch there, and I'll pull the trigger fast too. That catch kind of disappears, but when you're doing it slowly, there's a catch. So I would say from an uptake standpoint, at least uptake, it's not a very good trigger. However, once you get past that, when we get to our brake, it's a very nice brake. It's a very crisp, clean brake, and it doesn't break all the way back to the end of the frame, which I like quite a bit. And then we have our reset, and there's a reset. Again, the reset actually on the 509 I think is almost a little bit better. It's a really nice, clean snap. This one's not quite as clean. However, it is certainly audible and tactile. And then we get back to the start, and I'll do this again. So there's our uptake, and there's a little bit of that catch in there. It otherwise is smooth. And then we've got our brake, and then we've got our reset, and we go back to the start. So when you're doing this slowly, I don't think the VP9 necessarily has all that great of a trigger. However, when you're doing it a little bit quicker and like a normal trigger pull, it actually is very nice. It works much, much better. So from a trigger perspective for both of these guns, I would grade both of these somewhere between a 6.5 and a 7. They're good triggers. They're certainly usable. They're nice. They have all the attributes that you would want. However, neither one are the lightest or the cleanest triggers either. So I'm sure people will agree or disagree with that to one degree or another. This is merely opinion, but both certainly doable. Now, from a value standpoint, here's another place where we get a little bit further apart from each other. The 509, although it's still a newer gun, it's not quite as new as it was when it first came out. So I think the prices are starting to level off. And I've seen the 509 anywhere in the kind of mid-upper 400s to low to mid $500, depending on where you look. So it's coming in at I would say, a reasonably budget-friendly standpoint. Now, the VP9, having several different models, it's got a slightly wider range of costs there. When we talk about a base model VP9, especially without the sights or maybe the third magazine and even just a black frame on it rather than the FDE frame here or the gray frame, what have you, you're going to be looking kind of in the upper 400s to maybe low $500. I've heard people say they have found them as low as $559, something like that. That's a pretty good deal for a VP9. Now, when you start talking about maybe the LE version like this or other models that are similar to this, and the different frames, you're really going to be talking more in the $600, $650 mark, perhaps almost even $700, depending on where you look, and you might be able to find that a little bit cheaper, but you're going to pay a little bit more. Now, again, you get the upgraded sights and you get 3 magazines, so I think it's worth the value, especially if you're looking to upgrade sights. And I would also upgrade the sights on this at some point in time, perhaps, so that would be an extra cost there. But from a value standpoint, the 509 definitely takes it, depending on which model you're after. So we're kind of at the end of the video here, and once again, it's if I could only have one, so there must be a winner. And like I said before, both of these guns are great guns, and I think if you have either one, you're doing great. But I have to choose a winner here. This one, I must admit, and I have to be transparent with you, it's not quite as hard for me to do. I like the FN509. It's a decent gun, for sure, but I'm a fan of HKs. There's no doubt about that. I'm not an HK fanboy by any stretch. I like all guns. But I am certainly a fan of the HK, and it seems to shoot really well for me. And I attribute a lot of that to the ergonomics and the sight lineup, and even to an extent the trigger, although it's not the best trigger out there. But at the end of the day, if I could only have one, I would opt for the HK VP9. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about this. If you agree, disagree, maybe you have some suggestions for some other videos down the road. So I'm looking forward to reading all of that from you guys. And otherwise, once again, be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and I will see you next time. Thanks.